The first time Caleb saw the girl, she was on her knees in the dirt, her face smeared with mud and defiance. A man, broad and florid, stood over her, a half-empty bucket in his hand. The water had soaked the front of her thin dress, making it cling to her like a second, colder skin. She didn't shiver, though the wind that scoured the high plains had a bite to it, a promise of the winter to come. She just stared up at him, her eyes the color of a stormy sky, holding a fury that seemed too large for her small frame. Behind her, in the dark maw of a dilapidated barn, a smaller shadow flickered and was gone, a ghost of a boy, too terrified to even be seen. Caleb reined in his horse, the creak of worn leather a sudden intrusion on the tableau of quiet cruelty. The man, Marcus, turned, his face a mask of smug ownership. He ran a hand over his slicked-back hair. "Just teaching an animal its place, Caleb. You know how it is with wild things." Got a break earlier. Caleb's hands, calloused and scarred from a life of ranch work, tightened on the reins. He said nothing. His own ranch, a few miles across the barren stretch of rock and sagebrush, was a silent place. A place haunted by the ghosts of a woman's laughter and a little girl's song, both stolen by a fever that had swept through the valley 2 winters past. The silence there was a heavy blanket he pulled over himself each night. Here, the silence was different. It was a weapon, wielded by the man and endured by the child. He had come to talk about a stray steer, a simple matter between neighbors, but the words died in his throat. All he saw was the girl's chin, lifted in a silent scream of rebellion, and the faint, fearful outline of the little boy hiding in the shadows. He saw the way Marcus looked at them, not as children, but as chattel. As burdens to be beaten into submission. That night, back in his own home, the silence was unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards was the ghost of his daughter, Lily, running to greet him. The empty chair at the table was his wife, Sarah, her smile a memory that was beginning to fray at the edges. He sat by the cold hearth, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table beside him, and saw the girl's face in the flickering lamplight. He saw the boy's terror. They were wounds in the landscape, just as he was. His grief was a vast, internal plain, as desolate as the land outside his window. He had thought there was no room for anything else in that wasteland. He was wrong. Something had taken root there, something sharp and protective that he had thought long dead. He had spent 2 years turning his back on the world, nursing his own pain until it was all he was. But seeing them had been like holding a mirror up to his own hollowed-out soul and seeing a reflection he could no longer ignore. The world was full of pain, not just his own. And some pain, he was discovering, you couldn't just ride away from. The next morning, he didn't saddle his horse to look for the stray steer. He rode with purpose, straight back to the place of quiet cruelty. He found Marcus by the corral, kicking at a fence post. Caleb dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. He didn't waste time with greetings. "I'll buy the north pasture from you," Caleb said, his voice flat. Marcus stopped kicking, a greedy light entering his eyes. "That's prime grazing land, I know what it is," Caleb said. He named a price, a figure that was far too high, high enough to make a man like Marcus forget everything but the glint of coin. Marcus's eyes narrowed, searching for the trick. "Why?" "I want the extra acreage," Caleb lied. "And I'll take the 2 strays off your hands." As part of the deal, Marcus looked toward the barn, where the girl was forking hay with a grim determination. "Them?" He spat on the ground. "They ain't worth nothing, that's my offer," Caleb said, his gaze unwavering. The land and the children. A slow, ugly smile spread across Marcus's face. He understood. He saw it as one man taking another man's problem, for a price. He saw it as a transaction of property. "Done," Marcus said, sealing the deal that would sell 2 human souls for a patch of dirt. Caleb watched the girl. She had stopped working and was watching them, her small face pale, her expression unreadable. She looked like a cornered animal, waiting for the killing blow or the brief, miraculous moment of escape. Caleb knew, in that moment, that he had just stepped into a fight that was not his own, but one he was now bound to finish. The silence on his ranch was about to be broken. The ride back to Caleb's ranch was a silent procession under a vast, indifferent sky. Ilara walked a few paces behind his horse, her hand clamped tight around her brother's wrist. The boy, Finn, was a small, pale thing, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on the dust his sister's worn boots kicked up. They moved like shadows, leaving no more impression on the land than a passing breeze. When they arrived, the children stopped at the edge of the porch, refusing to cross the threshold into the house. It was a fortress of memory, every surface holding the faint imprint of Sarah and Lily. Caleb could feel their ghosts brush past him as he opened the door. To these children, it was just another cage, owned by another man. He didn't force them. He understood their language of fear better than they knew. He went inside, leaving the door open. He set a pot of stew to warm on the stove, the smell of seasoned meat and vegetables filling the quiet rooms. He placed 2 bowls, 2 spoons, and a loaf of fresh bread on the porch steps, then retreated into the barn to work, giving them the illusion of being alone. He mended a broken harness, the rhythmic pull of the needle through thick leather a familiar comfort. From the corner of his eye, he watched them. They were like a pair of feral cats, wary and watchful. Ilara crept forward first, her movements swift and silent. She snatched the bread, broke it in half, and gave the larger piece to Finn. They ate huddled together at the far end of the porch, their backs to the house, facing the open plains as if plotting an escape. Finn never made a sound. Ilara was his voice, his shield, his entire world. That night, they slept in the hayloft of the barn. Caleb found them there in the morning, curled together under a threadbare horse blanket, their small bodies a knot of shared warmth and terror. He left a bucket of fresh water and 2 clean cloths for them, then went about his chores. He did not speak to them unless necessary, and when he did, his voice was low and even. He was a constant, predictable presence. He fixed the fences. He tended the stock. He chopped wood. He let them see every part of his routine, a life governed by work and quiet solitude. He was showing them, through action rather than words, that his hands were for building, not for hitting. The house remained their biggest fear. It was the heart of this new territory, and Ilara refused to let them be trapped within it. On the 3rd day, a cold rain began to fall, turning the dust to a thick, clinging mud. It soaked their thin clothes and plastered their hair to their skin. Finn began to shiver, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that shook his tiny frame. Ilara wrapped her arms around him, her own body offering little warmth. Caleb watched them from the kitchen window. On the mantelpiece, just above the fireplace, sat a small, intricately carved wooden horse, its painted eyes smooth and black. He had carved it for Lily's 5th birthday. It was the last thing he had ever given her. He walked to the open front door and stood there, not looking at them directly. "It's warm inside," he said, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. He left the door ajar and went back to the fireplace, turning his back on them. He stared into the empty hearth, listening. For a long time, there was only the drumming of the rain. Then, a faint scuffling sound on the porch. He heard the hesitant creak of a floorboard just inside the door. He didn't turn. He waited. He felt a small presence enter the room, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and rain. It was Finn. He had come in from the cold. A moment later, Ilara followed, a silent guard dog placing herself between her brother and the strange man by the fire. They stood there, dripping on the floorboards, their eyes darting around the room, taking in the strange, clean space. Ilara's gaze landed on the mantelpiece, on the little wooden horse. She stared at it, her expression hardening, as if seeing proof of a life they could never have. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Caleb finally turned to face them. He looked at Ilara, her stormy eyes filled with a century of distrust. Her voice, when it came, was a raw, broken thing, like the scrape of rock on rock. "You going to sell us again?" Caleb met her gaze, his own eyes holding the deep, settled sorrow of a winter that never ends. He didn't flinch from the accusation. He knew it was the only currency she had ever dealt in, the fear of being bartered, traded, discarded. "No," he said. The word was simple, a stone dropped into a deep well. It wasn't a promise cushioned with comfort, it was a statement of fact, as solid and unadorned as the man who spoke it. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not belief, but a sliver of confusion. It was a start. The next day, he began the slow, painful process of dismantling the shrine he had built to his grief. He went into the small room that had been Lily's, a room he hadn't entered in 2 years. The air was thick with the scent of dried lavender Sarah had always kept in a small sachet on the dresser. He carefully folded Lily's small dresses, the faded calico and gingham a testament to a life cut short, and placed them in a wooden chest. He packed away her dolls and the worn storybook with the torn cover. But he left the wooden horse on the mantelpiece. It was no longer just a symbol of what he had lost, it was becoming a bridge to what he might find. He knew Ilara watched him, her sharp eyes missing nothing. He began to give her tasks, not orders. The chickens need feeding, he'd say, leaving the bucket of grain by the door. She would take it and march to the coop, her movements efficient and angry, as if daring the work to be a trick. He showed her how to milk their lone cow, his large, gentle hands guiding her small, tense ones on the first try. She recoiled from his touch as if burned, but she learned quickly. She was a survivor, and survivors learned. For Finn, he offered something else. He spent his evenings by the fire, not drinking, but carving. He took a small block of pine and, with a sharp knife, began to shape it. He worked slowly, the shavings falling to the floor like dry leaves. He was carving a bird, a small wren with its head cocked as if listening. When it was finished, sanded smooth as a river stone, he didn't give it to the boy. He left it on the edge of the cot where Finn now slept, a silent offering. For days, the wren sat untouched. Finn would look at it, his eyes tracing its shape, but he wouldn't go near it. Then one morning, Caleb saw him from the doorway. The boy was sitting on his cot, the small wooden bird held carefully in both hands, his thumb stroking its smooth back over and over again. It was the first time Caleb had seen him hold something that wasn't his sister's hand. A month passed. The fragile shell of their new life began to harden. Caleb decided it was time to take them to town. The trip to the general store in dusty Harmony Creek was an ordeal. People stared. Whispers followed them like flies. Mrs. Gable, the store owner's wife, gave them a pinched, disapproving look as Ilara and Finn huddled behind Caleb. Sheriff Peters, a man whose gut preceded him, stopped them on the boardwalk. His eyes, small and bureaucratic, lingered on the children. "Those are the Miller kids, ain't they?" he asked, not looking at them but at Caleb. "Heard their stepdaddy, Marcus, up and left the county. They're with me now," Caleb said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Peters grunted, his gaze dismissive. "See you keep them out of trouble." The encounter was a stark reminder that they were outsiders, a strange and unsettling constellation of a broken man and 2 feral children. But as they rode back to the ranch, Caleb noticed Ilara sat a little straighter. The town's judgment had been a wall they had faced together. The routine of the ranch became their bedrock. The harsh edges of Ilara's anger began to soften, replaced by a quiet, watchful competence. She started helping in the kitchen without being asked, her movements slowly losing their frantic edge. The silence in the house was changing. It was no longer the oppressive weight of grief but a shared, peaceful quiet. One afternoon, while Caleb was in the barn birthing a new foal, he heard a sound behind him. It wasn't Ilara. It was Finn. The boy was standing by the stall door, his eyes wide with wonder as the wet, gangly creature struggled to its feet. As the foal let out a shaky bleat, Finn made a sound. A small, sharp gasp of air. It was the first sound Caleb had ever heard him make. A profound sense of peace settled over Caleb, something he hadn't felt since before the fever. The ghosts in his house were finally receding, making room for the living. But peace in these lands was a fickle thing. The next week's mail brought a letter. The postmaster, a kindly old man named Elias, handed it to Caleb. It was addressed to Marcus Miller, care of the Harmony Creek post office. It had been forwarded from a town 3 counties south. On the back was the official wax seal of a county magistrate. A cold, familiar dread, the kind that signals a storm on a clear day, settled deep in Caleb's gut. He knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, that the past was not done with them yet. Caleb didn't open the letter. He held it in his hand, the crisp paper a harbinger of a battle he wasn't ready to fight. He could feel the weight of the magistrate's seal, the cold authority of a world that didn't know or care about the fragile peace he had built. That evening, he went to the fireplace, struck a match, and held the letter to the flame. He watched the official seal melt and blacken, the words turning to ash, as if by destroying the message he could destroy the threat it carried. But he knew better. It was only a delay. An omen. He said nothing to the children. He hardened himself, his quiet vigilance turning into a palpable tension that settled over the ranch. He found himself scanning the horizon more often, his hand instinctively resting on the worn stock of the rifle he kept by the door. Ilara noticed. She watched him with her sharp, intelligent eyes, sensing the shift in the air. Her own protective instincts, which had begun to soften, sharpened once more. She kept Finn closer, her hand often finding his, a silent promise of protection against a danger she couldn't see but could feel in the marrow of her bones. For several weeks, nothing happened. The rhythms of the ranch continued, a steady heartbeat against the looming silence. The foal grew stronger. The autumn air turned crisp. Finn even began to speak, his voice a quiet murmur, small, single words offered up like precious stones. Horse, bird, stew, each one was a victory, a testament to the safety he was beginning to feel. The fragile peace became a tentative happiness, a ghost of a life Caleb thought he had lost forever. Then, one afternoon, the omen came to life. A rider appeared on the horizon. Not a neighbor or a drifting cowhand. This figure moved with an arrogant, proprietary swagger, even on horseback. Caleb knew who it was before he could make out the face. The easy peace of the afternoon shattered like glass. It was Marcus. Ilara saw him from the porch where she was mending one of Finn's shirts. The needle froze in her hand. All the color drained from her face, leaving it a stark, terrified white. She didn't scream. She moved with the swift, silent terror of a doe scenting a wolf. She grabbed Finn, who had been tracing patterns in the dust, and pulled him behind her, her small body becoming a rigid, unbreachable wall. Caleb came out of the barn, a hammer in his hand. He saw the terror on Ilara's face and followed her gaze to the approaching rider. The cold dread from the post office returned, icy and sharp. Marcus rode right up to the porch, dismounting with a flourish. He had used Caleb's money well. He wore a new coat, polished boots, and a smug sneer that was more offensive than any weapon. He ignored Caleb completely, his cruel eyes fixing on Ilara. "Came back for my property," he said, his voice dripping with malice. He let his gaze travel over her clean dress, her neatly combed hair. "Look at you. Living in a real house. You've gotten soft." Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between Marcus and the children. The hammer in his hand felt heavy, purposeful. "They're not your property." Caleb's voice was a low growl. "You sold them." Marcus laughed, a short, ugly bark. "I sold a burden," he corrected, his eyes glinting. "Now I've come to collect an asset." He reached into his coat and pulled out a sheaf of folded papers, waving them like a banner of victory. "Turns out my dear departed wife had a rich uncle nobody knew about. He passed on, left a tidy inheritance to her, which, as the legal guardian of her only living issue, belongs to me." The papers were official, stamped with seals and signatures from a judge in another county. Marcus had twisted the law into a weapon. He had turned the children from a burden into a payday. As if on cue, a second rider appeared, trotting up the lane. It was Sheriff Peters, his face impassive, his presence lending the scene a chilling legitimacy. He had been summoned by Marcus, a tool to enforce a cruel claim. "He sent a wire," the sheriff said to Caleb, gesturing with his thumb toward Marcus. He took the papers, his lips moving as he read them. He sighed, a weary, bureaucratic sound. He looked at Caleb, his expression one of mild annoyance. "The law is the law, Caleb. These papers say he's their legal guardian." He has the right. Marcus's smile widened. He had them. The human antagonist and the systemic antagonist had merged into an unstoppable force. The law, blind and indifferent, was on the side of the monster. The confrontation was stark, cold, and for now, bloodless. Caleb stood his ground, a silent pillar of defiance, the children hidden behind him. Marcus savored his victory, his eyes crawling over Ilara with a possessive glee. He turned to Caleb, his voice smooth with triumph. "I'll be back in the morning to collect them. Have them ready. Or the sheriff here will take them for me." He mounted his horse, gave a final, mocking tip of his hat, and rode away, leaving the wreckage of their fragile peace scattered in the dust. The sheriff lingered a moment, his gaze unreadable. "Don't make this difficult, Caleb," he warned, before turning his own horse and following Marcus, leaving them alone under the weight of the coming dawn. That night, the ranch was no longer a sanctuary, it was a tomb waiting to be filled. Dread was a physical presence in the small house, suffocating the warm air from the fire. Ilara stood like a sentry by the single window in the main room, a long, sharp kitchen knife clutched in her right hand. Her knuckles were white. Her face, illuminated by the moonlight, was a mask of cold, desperate fury. She would not be taken again. She would fight, and if fighting wasn't enough, she would die on this patch of ground that had almost become a home. In the corner, behind the wood stove, Finn had curled himself into a tight ball. He was silent again, the few precious words he had gained sealed away behind a wall of pure terror. He had retreated back into the dark, soundless place where he had lived before Caleb. Caleb looked at them, at the fierce, doomed defiance in the girl and the absolute terror in the boy, and the ghosts of his own past rose up to choke him. He saw Lily, her small body racked with fever, and felt again the profound, soul-crushing helplessness of being unable to protect his own child. He had failed his daughter. He would not fail these children. The vow settled in him, not with heat, but with a cold, hard certainty. He would not let Marcus take them. He did not board the windows or barricade the door. A fight of guns and wood would be meaningless against the law, however corrupt. This was a battle for their souls, and it had to be fought on different ground. He walked to the fireplace and took the small wooden horse from the mantelpiece. He crossed the room to where Finn was hiding and knelt down. He didn't speak. He simply held out the horse. The boy flinched, but then his eyes fixed on the familiar object. Slowly, a small, trembling hand reached out and took it, clutching it to his chest like a holy relic. Next, Caleb went to the simple wooden chest where he stored his memories. He took out one of the dresses he had bought for Ilara in town, a simple frock of dark blue cotton. She had refused to wear it, as if accepting such a gift was a form of surrender. He laid it gently on the table. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you will not look like a victim." Then he turned and walked out into the cold night, heading for the barn. But he didn't go to check on the stock. He lit a lantern and walked to the back, to the small, filthy stall Marcus had forced Ilara to sleep in on that first day, the place where Marcus had declared her an animal. With a pitchfork and a broom, Caleb began to work. He shoveled out the soiled, rotten straw. He scraped the floorboards clean of years of filth. He swept away every cobweb, every trace of neglect and cruelty. He worked for hours under the lantern's glow, purifying the small space, transforming a site of humiliation into something else entirely. When he was done, the stall was spotless. He laid down a thick bed of fresh, sweet-smelling straw, as clean as any bed. In the grey light of dawn, Marcus returned, the sheriff riding beside him, a reluctant enforcer. Caleb met them on the porch. He was calm, his face set like granite. "They're not coming," he said simply. Marcus sneered, shoving past him into the house. "We'll see about that." He stormed through the rooms, his arrogant voice echoing in the quiet space. "Girl! Boy! Get out here!" But the house was empty. The cots were neatly made. The kitchen was clean. The children were gone. "Where are they?" Marcus bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "Playing games." Caleb didn't answer. He just turned and walked toward the barn. Intrigued and angry, Marcus followed, with the sheriff trailing behind. Caleb slid open the heavy barn door. Inside, bathed in the soft morning light filtering through the hayloft, stood Ilara and Finn. They were in the clean stall. Finn stood straight and tall, clutching the wooden horse to his chest. Beside him, Ilara stood even taller, wearing the new blue dress. They were not cowering. They were not hiding. They were waiting. A cruel, triumphant grin spread across Marcus's face. He thought they had given up, that they were presenting themselves for collection in the very place of their subjugation. "See," he said to the sheriff. "They know who they belong to. They know their place." He took a step forward, his hand outstretched to grab Ilara's arm. "Don't touch her." Caleb's voice was like the cocking of a pistol, quiet and deadly. It stopped Marcus in his tracks. He turned, his face contorted with rage. "Or what, rancher? You'll fight the law? You'll fight him." He gestured to the sheriff. But Caleb wasn't looking at Marcus. His eyes were fixed on Sheriff Peters. "You see two children, Sheriff. You see paperwork. I see two souls that man tried to break. He made this girl," Caleb's voice dropped, each word a heavy stone, "sleep in this very spot. In the filth. With the animals. He told her that's what she was. Is that the law you came here to uphold today?" He then turned his gaze to Ilara, his expression softening. "Tell him," he said, his voice a gentle command. For the first time, Ilara spoke directly to an authority figure, not with defiance, but with a terrible, unshakable truth. Her voice was clear and did not tremble. "He beat us," she said, her eyes locked on the sheriff. "When my mother was alive, and after. He locked us in the cellar without food. He told me I was worth less than his horses. He told Finn that if he ever spoke a word about it, he would sell him to the mines." The sheriff's face, once a mask of bureaucratic indifference, began to crumble. He looked from the clean, proud children standing in the immaculate stall to the ugly, greedy face of Marcus Miller. He saw the truth. Marcus, seeing his power evaporate, lost control. With a roar of pure frustration, he lunged for Ilara. "She's mine. The law says she's mine." In that instant, Caleb moved. There was no hesitation. It was not the clumsy rage of a brawl, but the swift, brutal efficiency of a man pushed past his limit. He didn't draw his gun. He met Marcus's lunge, sidestepped, and slammed him hard against the thick oak post of the stall. The air rushed out of Marcus's lungs in a pained grunt. The fight was over before it began. Caleb didn't kill him. He didn't even break him. He simply dismantled him, stripping him of his physical threat and his unearned authority. He shoved the whimpering, pathetic man toward the sheriff. "Get him off my land," Caleb said, his voice flat and final. Sheriff Peters looked at the cowering Marcus, then back at the children standing unbowed in the stall. He had come to enforce the letter of the law, but he had been shown its soul. He made a choice. He pulled out his handcuffs and clamped them on Marcus's wrists. "Let's go, Miller," he said, his voice now holding a new, hard edge. "We can sort out these papers, and your guardianship. Back in town. I expect it'll take a long, long time." As the sheriff dragged Marcus away, a broken and defeated man, Caleb walked back into the barn. The last shadow of the past was finally gone. He knelt in the clean straw, so he was eye level with the children. He looked at Ilara, at the strength that had never broken. He looked at Finn, at the small boy clutching a wooden horse. He reached out and put a hand on Finn's shoulder, the first time he had ever truly initiated such contact. The boy didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch. Caleb's voice was a whisper, a vow made in the quiet of the morning. "You're with me now." He paused, looking from one small, brave face to the other. "Your home." It was not a claim of ownership. It was a declaration of belonging. The three of them walked out of the barn and into the rising sun. The desolate land no longer seemed empty. It looked like a promise. They were no longer a broken savior and two wounded souls. They were the fragile, fierce, and beautiful beginning of a family. We tell stories like this one every week. Stories of hope, redemption, and the unbreakable human spirit. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more cinematic tales that matter. And let us know in the comments, what does the word families mean to you? Click here to watch another story about a life changed forever. We'll see you in the next one.